Welcome to Overcrest. I'm Chris, and Jake is not here. He is still somewhere sunny and comfortable, but have no fear. We've got Bertim, Berisha of BBI Autosport in to take his place. We've got a great interview talking about how obsession leads to entrepreneurism, which leads to a lot of success and future opportunities. It's a really, really great interview. I hope you guys enjoy it. But before we get to that, let's hear about Petrolbox.
Let's take a moment to hear from our sponsor, Petrolbox. Petrolbox is a monthly service made specifically for the automotive enthusiast. Each month, they carefully select items including tools, detailing supplies, apparel, garage gear, stickers, and publications to be sent right to your doorstep. It's a curated selection of the latest and greatest gear in the industry. And there's actually two different levels of subscription to choose from. You have the Petrolbox Basic, which costs less than $20 a month, and the Petrolbox Premium, which gets you even more gear for $39.95 a month. Be sure to check them out at mypetrolbox.com and use the code OVERCREST at checkout to get $6 off your first month.
What's going on, man? It's my pleasure to have you on the podcast. How are you?
Great. How are you doing?
I am doing well. It looks like you're in the shop, probably taking a break from doing a little bit of work.
Just got out of a meeting. Welcome to get out of that meeting, and now I'm going to spend some time with you.
Well, hopefully this doesn't feel like one of those meetings.
This isn't a meeting. This is a fun one.
Yeah, this is good. So BBI, man, like, I was out at the shop. My buddy Jason Whipple brought me out there, and we hung out with Dimitri, and I think we met you a little bit, but we hadn't been formally introduced, and we ended up meeting at SEMA and everything like that. But it was really rad. I was walking around there and seeing all the cool stuff that you do, and I saw Brownie parked outside, and I want to get to Brownie. I think that's kind of a cool story.
Yeah.
But before we get into all that, I kind of want to dig into how BBI came to be, and I want to talk about what BBI is, but first I want to find out how it came to be. So to do that, I think we need to go way back.
How far back do you?
I want to talk about. Tell me about kind of your journey with cars. Was it something that you were always into? Was there a seminal moment? Was there a time when you were like, you know what, this is it, cars for life. I'm in. I'm all in. What happened?
It's a good question. Yeah, to answer that shortly, I'll answer it the long form here. But I was always, ever since I could remember, obsessed with cars. As long as I could remember, it was just cars. Sitting in class, as soon as I could draw or write, I was drawing pictures of trucks going through the mud, or I was drawing semi trucks. Back when I think my earliest memories when I was like 6 and 7, I was really big into like Kenworths and all that. So
Okay.
I was just always into cars, and then the love of speed started to happen. Right, I used to race BMX bikes and dirt jump, and so I think I used downhill ski and backcountry a lot growing up in Washington.
BMXing, like, back in the day was sick, dude. It was a different time when you would, like, we had this. I would bike probably 20 minutes. I had a Diamondback,
nice
old piece of shit Diamondback Riptile is what it was called, nice. Like mid school,
yeah.
93. I was 12, 13 years old. I bought it myself. You know,
right.
It was like everybody else had Haros and GTs. And here I am with this Diamondback. Anyway, so it would always be this thing where you'd bike over to somebody's house, you'd see if they wanted to bike somewhere, and then you would bike over to the track. And it was always this great experience of just like bombing around and zipping around like the track in the woods that the older kids had built. It was an excellent time of life, I think.
You've just described my childhood from like 10 to 20. I did it pretty heavily that whole time. But yeah, that's 7 days a week. Rain or shine up in Washington State, we'd ride. Same thing. I had a GT at the time, and I was saving up for a PK Ripper, and then I bought an Elf, and then broke that thing, and we had a lot of cool.
How'd you break it?
Just cased a set of doubles.
Okay.
Yeah, down to.
Yeah, I broke a frame right at the neck, jumping over a tabletop, and just landed, blew both tires out, broke the frame at the neck, and I was hurt, man. I was like crawling.
Yeah.
I wasn't broken anything, but man, I smashed pretty good. And I think after that, I kind of just didn't do as much. That was a pretty scary experience.
Yeah, I retired dirt jumping. I overshot a set of doubles and landed on my back and blew my whole shoulder out, and it was all everywhere. And so I was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. I was 20. I was already working on cars at the time. I couldn't work for like 6 weeks. I was like, I'm broke. I don't know what to do. I can't do that. I got to focus on the cars. But yeah, I think that, the lineage between downhill skiing, BMX, dirt bike, all that fun stuff kind of the new outlet was the automobile, right? So I was always obsessed, and now I bought a '67 Mustang when I was 14 for my aunt, and my dad and he didn't know shit about cars, and we just started working on it. And I actually
hold on a second. So this car, your aunt had this car.
Yeah.
Describe this car. Like,
So
what color was it? What condition was it in? Why did you love it? Did you take rides in it? What happened?
No, I didn't really. I wasn't really like a Mustang guy or anything like that, but she had the car. It was white with blue interior, a '67 Mustang with a 289 in it and a 3-speed automatic. And my dad's like, well, if you like cars so much, you need to save up some money. So I saved up some money, and my aunt sold it to me for $800 when I was 14. This was back in the mid '90s. And
was your dad into cars at all?
no, so this is what trips my parents out. Still, they still come to the shop like, I can't believe you're doing this, but like they weren't into cars. And my dad saw that I had an interest in it, so we started working on cars together. We'd go buy a junkyard engine, we'd rebuild it on the garage floor, and I'd port cylinder heads with the Dremel, and I was just reading Hot Rod magazine, and we were kind of learning a little.
What was his background?
My dad was always he was always technical. So when we were growing up, he was actually a glazer, like installing windows. Then he started remodeling homes, and then he went into like biomedical electronics. So my dad went into doing emergency rooms and bedsides and tele systems for nurses stations. So he understands like electronic flow paths, and he's always been somebody who could just figure anything out. And I think I got a little bit of that from him, self-interest, dive into the cars, see how they work, try to understand what's inside the box before you start thinking outside of it too far. That's kind of the approach that he taught me to take on almost anything. And so it was a great experience growing up, working on that Mustang. And then what happened was that Mustang, I was like, oh shit, I broke the engine or I blew a drive shaft, so I need money. So
how often are you breaking this thing?
all the time. And it just felt like all the time. And I started actually street racing that car quite a bit to make money. And that got me in some trouble, but I was making money. So then I had to get a good, honest job.
How does one start street racing? I'm imagining this is the 90s,
Yeah,
probably mid 90s, whatever.
Yeah, this is.
How does one get into it? Do you just like pull up to a light and go, hey,
Well,
hey,
actually,
and then you meet each other at the gas station afterward?
kind
Or
of.
what?
There was this in Washington State. There's a Taco Bell there, and we'd always meet at this Taco Bell, like just screw around. We were like 16, 17 years old, and every once in a while, somebody with like a Chevelle or something would come up, and we'd just go down the street and start running. And then one day, this guy came up, and he said, "Hey, down by the airport, every Saturday night, everybody gets together. It's like a big thing." And sure enough, we go down there, and there's like older guys, or probably my age now, but back then there were older guys pulling their cars off of a trailer. There's, tub 67 Camaros and Javelins with 440s and all that fun stuff. And so I'd go run one, I'd lose a little bit, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to try to get a 351 from the junkyard at Windsor. We're going to run that thing. And then you put that thing in at big cam, and it's all fun. And then you blow the transmission out the bottom of the car. And then you're like, okay, I got to go into a C6. And then you blow your drive shaft, and then the rear end. So it just kept like doing that. And then finally I got a setup that could hook up okay. And I started winning a couple of bucks from people. And then we got trouble.
How does betting money work? How do you decide who's betting, how much?
It's usually the loudmouth.
Go?
It's usually the loudmouth out there back in the day. It was some loudmouth that would call out us young guys, and I got $50 that I'd smoke you. Okay, cool. So then you had $50. So you'd have to come up with a couple $100s, and then the bets started getting a little bit bigger. And here's a funny part.
How does reputation play into this? I mean, you think of like B-52 bombers back in the day. You've got all the pictures of like all the planes that were shot down on the side, all the tick marks. How do people know like I should bet this guy? Do you guys do you show each other what's under the hood, or you keep it a secret?
No, you try to be that's sleeper. You try to be the sleeper and everything like that. And a lot of people, it's just kind of reputation. You get out there, and then somebody, like if you did decently well, somebody else would be like, oh, okay, I'm going to run you next week. Cool. Yeah, then they run you next week. But what happened there?
They're in the garage all night, every night, prepping.
And that's all we did. We were tearing things out of our car. I was a lot of junkyard stuff, like trying to go get junkyard finds, like find a 9-inch out of a Lincoln. You got to narrow it up a little bit and doing all that fun stuff. So this was like I was 16, 17 years old in that time frame. Here's a funny part of the story. Another guy had a 67 Mustang as well that him and his dad built, and he was from the neighboring school. So he came down and just smoked my ass. And so I was like, oh, and this guy, and he was cocky, just an asshole. So he came down smoked me a few times, and then we kind of became friends. And I tried buying his rear end off him. He had a 411 with a posi, and he's like, yeah, okay, fine. Well, we ended up, long story short, becoming like best friends, and he actually was an ordained minister and married my wife and I. So we met street racing. Now he runs a wildly successful business up in Santa Barbara, and just crushing it. And we still bullshit every once in a while. But it's funny that our lives and paths kind of went using the car and started really pushing and made a living out of it, an honest living. But the reason why I say honest living is because we started getting in a lot of trouble. We started, the street racers were getting shut down. Actually, Jared, our engine builder here, he would always show up on his Gixxer. He had a Ninja, a Kawasaki Ninja. So he'd always try to run us, and we'd show up and kind of just hang out together. And 20 years later, he's still building engines here. But it's a kind of a tight bond when you're starting to cut your teeth in the early stages of your automotive life. It's like there's some impressionable times and moments that really stick with you. And you say, well, if I want to do this for the rest of my life, but I got to figure out how to do it and make a living, stay out of jail, be responsible, stay alive. And, then. Did
you have any run-ins with the law doing it?
Yeah. I spent a lot of time in the back of police cars, a lot of time at the impound yards trying to get my Mustang out. And it was up in Washington State. We were in Bellevue and Renton area. And it's just kind of back then it was a small town. So, like if I threw a house party and the cops that showed up, I would also see them in the drive-through at a Wendy's, and they'd be like, like taunting me or doing so. So it was almost name basis, and they're like, just stay out of our way, and you're not going to sit in the back of our car, but don't be an idiot,
Right.
So it kind of had a little small town vibe, but it was still big enough that you could get out in the woods and find a good straightaway.
It's interesting though. You talk about those relationships that you form when you're cutting your teeth.
Yeah.
And it's different than relationships you form earlier in life. I feel like you're a lot more as you age and move on in life, you become more wary of new relationships. Whereas like when you're young and you're just cutting your teeth, it's, hey man, let's just do this.
Yeah.
I feel like for some reason that happens less and less as you get older. Is it because we're more guarded? I don't know.
I would say
it's tough.
I would say 100%. I'm very aware of that too. You're so pure back then, and you're like, well, fuck, you like the shit I like the shit you like. Let's hang out. Let's spend time together. And then it's not.
It's almost like my kids. They go to the playground and they just the other kid. That's just, it doesn't matter. Hey, you're a kid. I'm a kid.
We're best friends.
Whatever. Race, gender, doesn't age, nothing. Let's just play. Push me on the swing. Go down the slide. Play tag. It doesn't matter.
And I think, you get into a situation. You also develop and evolve as a human, and you start to. Maybe you have nuances, or maybe you see more nuances in other people, or somebody burns you, or, you become, but you start to 100%, you start to get guarded. I mean, you look at a young child, like my son's 6 and 7, he's almost 7, such a pure soul of like he hasn't been burned. He's just this bright shining ray. And then, now you're like me, I'm just grumpy. I'm like, no, don't talk to me. Okay. You're kind of cool. You're probably want something from me at BBI, blah, blah, blah. No, you can't really go through life like that. I try to be really open with everybody and treat people with the same respect that I'd want. And I like the bullshit. I like to talk. So
I think that in the end, the scale comes out. If you're accepting and I think you're going to get burned.
Yeah.
You're gonna. Yeah. It's gonna happen. But I think at the end of the day, the scale always tips in the favor of the people that are open-minded. But it gets hard as you get older.
I agree.
Anyway, sorry, that's just interesting tangent there.
No, it is a good tangent. But I think there is a bell curve to that. There's like I'm everybody's best friend. Then you're like, oh, I got burned, and then also you're like, well, now I know who I want to surround myself with, and then you start to attract like-minded people, and it's all good. Like you and I.
Yeah.
When we started talking at SEMA, I'm like, I like that guy.
Yeah.
I want to hang out with him.
Yep.
But yeah, so
it's weird how you get that notion for people too.
Yeah.
It's like when you're in a hotel room and you walk up to the door and someone knocks on the door, what's the first thing you do?
People.
Is you look through the peephole and you judge that person immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately, it doesn't matter. And I think that's that's what you do in real life too. You meet somebody and you immediately, for better or for worse, make these judgments about people, and you can kind of get your bullshit detector starts to become, maybe that's what it is. Maybe like you don't have a bullshit detector when you're a kid.
Yeah, I think
and as you grow older, you start to add these little mods to your bullshit detector where it becomes more sensitive, and pretty soon that shit's going off all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, seriously, because you meet more and more people, then all of a sudden you start compartmentalizing them, and then also now you're like,
Yeah.
wait, now I'm the person who's all judgy. Like this person can be
Yeah.
great.
Oh,
I'm just, it's a
Yeah. You got to check yourself sometimes
absolutely
for sure.
100%. Yeah, but yeah, we'll go back to the cars. That was a good segue though.
Yeah. You're blowing up drive shafts, putting in Lincoln rear ends.
Yeah, doing all that fun stuff. Learning a lot about cars. So had to make an honest living. Talked to my dad. He's like, yeah, you're gonna get in too much trouble. Your trouble's gonna cost you more than you're making. So I got it.
How much were you making on a weekly basis, do you think?
There was never consistent, but it would be enough that I needed to buy tools to work on my car, or I needed to get a favor from the drive shaft guy, and that was something that I would go work some stuff off. Like the guy who had a driveline place not too far from, he did big semi truck drive lines, but I'd go clean up his shop and help him. He's like, all right, fine, I'll burn you up a drive shaft, but you owe me a week of 3 hours a day. So I'd go do that, and then here's my drive shaft. And then
did he need your help, or did he see something in you?
No, he didn't need my help. He was just like, hey, here's another young kid who's like actually into cars, and it's fun. And I got a lot of that. I got really, really lucky with people giving me opportunities like that, and then me just jumping on them. And if somebody said, hey, for example, my old boss Ford, I said, yeah, you can work here, but you're going to clean the toilets for a month or two, and then you're going to do this. And I just jumped on it. I was like, in my head, I'm going to try to do it better than anybody. Why not? Because I don't want to do this anymore. I want to prove that I want to prove that I can actually make the proper steps to get to working on cars. But on that same breath, I started working at a Texaco gas station because I needed consistent money and I needed a job. And I met two other guys who worked there that were also street racers. And they were badass. They're older than me. One had a 67 Camaro. One had I think it was a Javelin. And they were both fast as shit. So I was aspiring to try to run with these guys.
Dude, javelins, man. I have a thing for javelins.
I do too. And since then, and I remember he had, when I say quintessential, like just transitioning from grunge or from a heavy hair metal to grunge, in Seattle in the mid 90s to late, so everybody had mullets, everybody wore flannels, and everybody had air shocks in the back of their cars with, 10-inch wide, the slotted mags that were all, and then the fenders just burned to shit. So that was the thing to have. It was like that 70s look, but they're carrying it out into the 90s. But that Javelin was fast. High compression, some 440 I think he had in it with a dual 4 barrels and a hood scoop. And I was just like, this is it. I want a blower hanging out of my Mustang. So I was working there in the register. And this is kind of what kicked off the fact that I was like, oh shit, I can actually do this. There was a manager named Mike who didn't like me at all there. He was managing the back of the shop. The shop would close at 6. I'd work till 8. So I'd get bored and I'd just go back there. This was before cell phones and Instagram and all that shit, right? So you don't log into anything. You read Hot Rod magazine and then you go clean the shop or do something. So I was cleaning the shop up for about a month, and then
alone with your thoughts.
Yeah, just alone with my thoughts.
Just thinking.
Exactly.
I wonder if I put those different jets in there, if that thing is going to be just a little bit faster. I wonder if the accelerator pump rod, maybe that's off. Maybe that's what's calling it. Like all this stuff that you're thinking about is just.
Oh yeah, I'd have my carburetor, my Edelbrock or my Holly just taken apart in that gas station all the time. So.
Yeah.
One day, I grabbed the hose reel and my hand was black after that. So I just cleaned the hose, a little bit of brake clean and a rag, and I pulled all the hoses out, cleaned all the hoses, and kind of like tightened the shop up a little bit. And that guy Mike came in the next morning and goes, hey, who did this? And the owner goes, oh, Bertim did. So by the time I came in, Mike's like, hey, I just want to tell you what you did there, that little extra bit of work. He goes, that goes a long way with people. You didn't have to do that, and you did it. And he's like, he showed me like a little bit of respect there and a little bit of like thank you and gratitude. And I was like, holy shit, this is all I have to do. I have to just go work a little bit harder than somebody else next to me, do a little bit extra, more than what I've been asked of. And I could probably go places because I had no interest in going to school. I dropped out of. I didn't really drop out of high school. I just stopped going. So I guess, yeah. The only reason why I stayed enrolled in high school was because auto shop, and my teacher, John Doherty there, he was rad, and he's an ex-street racer, and he taught me how to like set up a torque converter and launch, because then we started going to high school drags and doing things like that. So by the time my senior year, I was all Fs with 2 As, and I was like, well, school's not for me. My parents were pretty disappointed, but they always knew that I wasn't an idiot. They just said, like, I just don't care about school. I want to do cars. So my dad really told me, he goes, listen, son, we don't have the money to float you. So if you're not going to go to school, you're going to work and you're going to move out. So, I mean, it was great. I mean, I'd still hang out and go eat dinners and love my family, and they love me. But my dad was like, you're not gonna be a deadbeat. You're gonna go do something. And I was like, fine, I'm gonna do cars. He goes, okay, well, I don't care how you do it. You have our support and love, but you got to figure it out. So the gas station was going well, and then after that, I got a job at a Ford dealership, cleaning cars. But my goal was to always work at this place called Park Place Motors. That's in Washington State. And it was really close to our BMX track. So since I was 13, I'd ride over there every day and beg David and Butch, please hire me when I turn 16. Day I turned 16, skipped school, got my driver's license, drove straight there with my Mustang. Hey, hire me. They're like, oh, we can't. When you're 18, you can work here. So I'm like, cool. The day I turned 18, I was working at a Prestige Ford, the dealership. I could not stand the manager. He was such an asshole. I just said, okay, cool. I'll be back. I'm going to go to lunch. I just quit and left like an idiot, but I shouldn't have done that because it's a small world. But I went and got that job the day I turned 18 at Park Place. And here's where things accelerated. Park Place, I was cleaning the cars, like parking. They had a used consignment lot. So they had a lot of cool shit like Superformance Cobras. They had the Elise contract for Lotus. They had some Caterhams there, and then they had a huge like luxury side, so they had BMWs and all that fun stuff. So my cousin and I got jobs there, and then I proceeded to just talk to the manager and the management there and ask them, hey, just hire all my friends. So pretty soon all of my friends were working there. We're having the time of our lives, and we're working our asses off because we all kind of had the same work ethic growing up. There's something about like when you're BMXing, you have to work on your bike and you have to ride it every day, and it's through the rain. There you have to start to become efficient with your time because the sun sets. You got to get it all in after school, and I feel like some parts of that help set like a time presence for me. But anyways, got that job. But in the back of the shop, a guy named Greg Fordall ran a Porsche tuning shop, kind of a dealer alternative service place, but he also had a race team. And when I say a small shop, I mean it was like probably 1,000 square feet, 1,200 square feet, one roll-up door, no office really. And then so I would always mess with him. And this is how naive I was at the time. I'd get off work at 8, and they're always there till 10, 11 o'clock at night every time. But he lived far away, so he wouldn't show up till about noon. He'd just avoid traffic and get in at noon. So every day at 8, I would just go to his shop and hang out. And I remember sitting at the desk in the front. He shared the showroom with the other dealership. And I go, Greg, how do I get into this? What school do I need to go to? I think that's what I want to do. I want to do what you do. I want to work on these cars. He goes, it's a school of hard knocks, man. That's how you get into this shit. I'm like, oh, crap. Okay, cool. So I went and asked my old boss. I go, what's the school of hard knocks? Where do I go? How do I apply? And that's how naive I remember that. And I was like, son of a bitch. So he starts laughing. He goes, who told you that? I go, Fordall over there told me that. And he goes, you know what that means? That means like you have to eat shit. You have to work your ass off. And no school is going to teach you how to work on a 993 RSR, right? No school is going to teach you how to go change tires over a pit lane. You have to figure it out, and you have to start from the bottom. So that's that. I started there about 2 years.
How did you feel hearing that? Were you like, was it a positive thing or a negative thing? Were you motivated by that, or was it? Did you see it as a hurdle?
No, I looked at it like it was shitty because it made me feel like that guy's not going to get me. I'm not going to be able to get in through him. It made me feel like he basically told me, beat it, kid. And he kind of did. He was like, scram. Like, I was an 18-year-old kid with an attitude who BMX'd and usually had road rash on my face or arms or in a sling all the time, every time he saw me anyways. But after 2 years, I was about 20, and I still continued to go to his shop and clean up after. And we started to develop a little bit of a relationship, but he was very cold. Like, I don't have time for this. Like, if you want, go clean it up. And the shop was thrashed. And so I was like, okay, cool. Kept cleaning. He's like, I was 19 because I remember I just looked it up yesterday. Actually, I was looking up some stats on a 993 GT2 Evo that the first time I ever saw run was at Mid-Ohio. It was June of 99. And I just turned 19. That's right. And he said, hey, kid, I got an opportunity. Come to Mid-Ohio with us. You go ask your boss. We can have, Wednesday through Sunday off. We got an IMSA race out there. So they ran a car in GT. or so it's GTU. Yeah, GTU, GTO, and LMP1. So it was a GTU, it was a 993 RSR, owned by a woman named Kim Hiskey, and her co-driver was a guy named Randy Popst. I think a lot of people have heard of Randy.
Yep.
I get out there. My boss tells me, no, you can't have the time off, so I'm on the airplane already. I'm gone on the way out there. And all I was supposed to do is like take tires back and forth and go to Subway, get everybody sandwiches. And I'm listening to these cars rip around the track. First time I've ever been to actually a track except for a drag strip. And I was like,
what were your thoughts on stuff like Porsche at that time? Was it something that was just kind of unfamiliar, but like you had it on a pedestal? What was your thoughts of it?
So,
because coming from like a street racing muscle car background, it's not really tied to Porsche in any way.
I've always been obsessed with Porsches, and that started when I was 8 years old. And there's a quick story. My cousin and I were playing in his front yard in Bellevue, Washington, and we saw, because we were reading all the magazines, we were obsessed with cars, and we saw what looked like a dark gray Porsche 959 go by, and we're like, well, those aren't in the States. How is it a kid car? But it looks so real. We chased it down the street. Then we went back and looked at the poster on his wall because he had a poster of a white one. We're like, holy shit, that was a 959. And for some reason, that always stuck with me. Later, I found out when I was like 18, working at this dealership, and I told them all that story. They're like, listen, that was a gray market car. Bill Gates was driving it, and Paul Allen's the one who bought that for him. When I was 8 years old, I saw that thing, and that's kind of what. For Porsche, I was always Porsche, and then this dealership had a lot of used Porsches. The first badass car I ever drove was a 1981 930 turbo that made about 500 horsepower. It was slammed on the deck. It was what's that darker red that it's like not arena red, but it wasn't guards red. It was a darker red.
I want to say like polo red, but that's not right either.
Yeah, it was just a little bit of a darker red. It had all black Fuchs on it and like Hoosier tires. I think the time that they were like BFGs, but they were like road race tires. And the thing, I got to drive that car from downtown Seattle at a car show back, and I remember going across the 520 bridge. I was like, okay, I'm going to open it up. And I learned what turbo lag was. Luckily, I was in third gear, didn't like swap ends on me, but I remember like on the throttle, watching the boost gauge creep. I'm 18 years old. I have no business doing that. I have like up to 110, clicking to fourth, and just kept going. I was like, oh my God. This is it. I'm actually getting goosebumps telling the story right now because I remember the feeling of hearing the wastegate start to open up, and it left such an impression on me. So Porsche was always the pinnacle. Like no matter what, Mustangs are cool, whatever. But the Porsche was the pinnacle. So in Mid-Ohio, the right front tire changer gets sick, and he can't change tires. Well, here's a strapping young 19-year-old who's eager. I said, put me in, coach.
Capable arms.
Yeah. I said, put me in. And he's like, okay, well, we're going to practice. So Fordall made me practice every night till midnight, the car in pit road. And this guy, his name's, we call him Motec Joe. He's still on the circuit. But he would have his rev limiter on his minivan and cruise by at 25 miles an hour, like right on my heels. And just like trying to distract me because when you're turning and you're pulling tires back, you have to keep it within your box because other traffic's coming in. You can get clipped, especially right front. On a clockwise circuit where pit lane's on the driver's side, you have to be, so you're going over the wall past the car, and we did that. My knuckles were bleeding.
That whole area is really intimidating. It's terrifying.
Going over,
getting like a pit pass and being around it scares the hell out of me.
You would know because you're in media. You've experienced that, right?
Yeah,
you constantly.
I have experienced it, and it's terrifying. You're always in somebody's way, no matter what. No matter what you do,
and you're always trying to get no matter what. It's always trying to kill you. There's always cars.
Yeah,
and you don't hear half the shit.
Loud as fuck. Can't talk to anybody. Everybody's got headphones on.
It's just massive amounts of energy.
Chaos.
Yeah, and then you're like you said, you're in headphones and you're trying to concentrate on your job, but like every single other team has somebody like you there doing the same shit, and it's mayhem. Yep. It's actually almost intoxicating. It's like as soon as I went over the wall during the race, I was like, holy shit. I go, this is it. Well, luckily. I practiced as much as I could, knuckles bleeding, knees bleeding, everything like that. Finally, he said, okay, I think you're ready. And I nailed that first tire change. And then that's what set it off where Greg's like, okay, you show that you're willing to learn. You show that you're willing to work hard. Cool. Maybe at the next race, you can come with us. So we land back in Seattle, go to my job, go to the schedule on Monday morning. I'm not on the schedule.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Yeah. And Mike, he was a total asshole. He was the manager there. Anybody can attest. He goes, what's wrong, son? I'm like, I'm not on the schedule. He goes, no shit. He goes, get your stuff out of here, beat it. And like, just so it's like really like, come on, I'm a lot kid. I'm making like $6 an hour. Just chill out. I went back to Greg. I'm like, Greg, they fired me. You have to hire me now. He goes, shit. Okay, well, you'll be cleaning the floors. I'm not going to put you on a car. I don't trust you. All this stuff. But anyway, so he hired me, and I was like, that's what I was doing. I was like, it was my job. I took it under my mission to make that shop cleaner, make sure that tools were put away, things were organized, and did everything I could to like do a good job there. All of the time, I kept telling him I want a road race. So he's like, well, probably the quickest way for you to road race is, buy a 944 from the wrecking yard, because there's tons of them up in Seattle for some reason. Buy a 944, and everybody raced those things in SCCA. It was like called ITS. Yeah, ITS. ITE was a class above it, I believe. I could have those wrong, but so that was my goal: buy a 944 at some point, and then weld a cage in it and go race it, because it's a showroom stock class, so it's like stock wheels. You can put conies on it. You put a cage in it, a fire system. Can't touch the motor. I mean, you can freshen it. Can't touch it. And then, minor things like you had to have a DOT style tire on it, like a Hoosier. So we ran Hoosiers. Anyways, the point is, I'm going to get into Brownie, because a year later, I'm like, Greg, I think I'm ready to work on cars. Like, I was working on my Mustang in there every once in a while, and he, he's seen that I'm kind of competent, but I was not trained. Brown 911 pulls.
It's just it's weird how like working on a Mustang and working on a 911, they're so similar and different at the same time. I mean, obviously you've got carburation and you're dealing with some CIS and stuff, which is totally different. It's just getting into a 911. A lot of the knowledge doesn't transfer over.
No, you have to. What does absolutely nothing transfers.
To be honest,
nothing.
It just
you
doesn't.
Torsion bars. I was like, what the fuck is a torsion bar? I was like, I think I saw one.
I was trying to relate a Mustang and a 911 in my head somehow, and I'm in my head searching for. No, there's nothing. It just doesn't really transfer over.
Yeah, one's got a solid axle. One has swing arms like a dune buggy. Like, it's just like, they're so different. Yeah. And but what you do carry over. Hopefully, you carry over. You know your way around a toolbox. You can apply some sort of logic. You have to.
Yep.
Lefty loosey, righty tighty, that kind of stuff. But there was no real. I mean, like on Brownie, so that car pulls in. And Greg goes, okay, you're putting some Coney Yellows in the back of this thing. It needs new rear shocks. I'm like, I get to do it? Cool. So I'm borrowing his tools.
All right, what car is this?
This is a 19...
Tell us what this car is.
This car is a 1981 Brown SC. It's brown on brown on brown. And it had, at the time, it still does actually, had Fixie FM5 wheels, some 17-inch wheels. And Fixie is a pretty cool wheel company was started by a guy named Jim Fixie up in the Pacific Northwest. And he would always be by the shop. And so the customer who ordered a set of black Fixies. Well, they screwed up on the anodizing, so they turned they're like purple. If you ever seen like worn out anodized black, it's like purple, but they're purple out of the box. The owner actually ended up liking them. He was like, oh, they don't look bad with the brown, and they're kind of cool. So yeah, the car was like relatively stock. The guy would autocross it every once in a while. Really nice customer at the time, and I think I was about 20, right about then. This was about year 2000. So Greg's like, hey, listen, customer doesn't mind. I'm going to train you how to put shocks on this thing. And their idea of training me to put shocks on it was laughing at me as I'm doing things, and like having to take the heater box off to get to the top of the shock mounts, and then the car's on the lift, and then the shock is actually the droop limiter because it's a torsion bar car. So I have I pulled the e-brake on the wheel, on the rear wheel, and then I have a floor jack under the tire trying to get the preload off of the lower strut. And then Greg was like, "You're gonna kill yourself. This thing's gonna like." Yeah. But anyways, I ended up changing the shocks, and I thought that was special. That was like the first car I ever got to really work on in his shop. And then he's like, "Well, everything's tight. You did a good job." And it slowly started segueing. Then I started doing more jobs with him, and then he trained me on the tire machine. So if you can be proficient on the tire machine, then you're showing some responsibility there. But that was a workout, because it wasn't like the touchless ones. It was the irons and all that. And we had the race team, so I'm always doing slicks that have been baked onto the wheels, and they always run the wheels just a hair tight, so you have to set them out in the sun, and there's not a lot of sun out in Seattle, so you had to get creative. So I mastered the tire machine at that time, and then I started working on the alignment rack, and he's like, all right, I'm going to teach you how to set things up. But the Brownie, I want to touch on Brownie. That car came back like 4 years later after Greg moved to a bigger shop. We all moved to, that was 3 years later. We moved to a bigger shop on the other side of the campus. And I was starting to get into fab work, and I loved fab work. And by this time that car showed back up, I've already bought a 944 for $300. I already built a junkyard engine for it. You know, I was so in debt to Greg that I was barely taking a paycheck because I would just buy Coney Yellows and coilovers for it, or, you know, takeoffs. And then I would finally built a roll cage in this car. It was horrible. It was like the A-pillar bars came, and I couldn't get that angle right, where it's a compound angle where you bend it back and then out as it's coming up the A-pillar. And so it came in far, and then I had to bend it back out, and I just had to get it done because as I'm building this car, the next day I was going to go try to get my license up at the track. But so anyways, I was starting to fabricate. Brownie comes back in, and Greg's like, yeah, this guy wants a louder exhaust for it. So I'm like, cool, I get to build an exhaust. So I built this piece of shit exhaust system with 2 Flowmaster mufflers, center exit, and it was so freaking loud and droned so bad in the car, but the customer loved it. So I was like, okay, sure. It was a cool experience. It was all MIG welded, like almost like galvanized piping from the auto parts store with like the crinkle bends in it.
Yeah.
And then I started researching like, how do I buy mandrel bends, cut it, and we started doing all that stuff. But 3 years later, I leave. I come down to California in search of a bigger career. That car then gets sold to one of my friends, John, who's still a real close buddy of mine. Also a dumbass street racer like me back in the day, and he had a '65 Mustang. So he bought Brownie, and I'd go back up and visit them, and we'd drive it around. It was fun. I love that car. Ended up selling it. Like 4 years ago, he's, hey, I found Brownie again. I'm going to buy it. I'm like, oh, badass. I go, if you ever sell that car, I want it. He's like, oh, I'm never selling it. Never selling it ever. Well, a year after that, he's like, hey, dude, I found a Carrera RS. I'm selling Brownie. I'm like, okay, I don't have the money right now. Damn it, I wish I could buy it. Well, 2 days later, it just shows up here. He's like, send me $10K now. Send me $10K next month. And just try, you know, you're going to have that car. So now I own the very first 911 that I ever worked on. And it's actually sitting right.
That's awesome.
I just drove it. I don't know if you can see it right there, but
there it is,
it's
man.
parked in front of the shop there.
That's a great car. It's got great patina. It's got a good look.
Yeah, I love that thing. I mean, I have so much fun driving that car. It's just, it doesn't make any horsepower. I get gapped by standard traffic, you know, just
anything, a minivan.
Yeah, a mom in a minivan smokes me. But it's just, you know, it's on-ramp fun. It's you know, a tired 915 in there, so you're rolling through molasses, and it's great. It's a great driving car. But that's kind of like the story of Brownie. That's I've skipped out a lot of shit on how BBI has become, and I can fast.
Well, yeah. Well, let's touch on like what did you get? What job did you get when you came into California? What were you looking for? What did you end up with?
I worked with Greg up in Seattle, and I came down. We did the Tribute to Lamar down here at Willow Springs, and I met a couple other shops and a couple other young guys working in the industry. One of which is named Joey Seeley. I met him at. We were both crewing on teams with RSRs, so it's very rare that you had RSRs in the Tribute to Lamar back then. They were still kind of on the pro circuit also, and then you'd have 2 young guys got together, and I met his boss, who was some wild maniac out of San Diego, and we kind of hit it off. And he said, hey, if you ever move to California, you have a job. So I Googled where the most Porsches are sold, and I think it was AOL at the time, and it was Fort Lauderdale area, you know, champion.
What was your AOL screen name?
It still is spooled67 at AOL.com. Because nice. I had all these aspirations of putting a single turbo on the old Mustang there. So
right on.
So it's I ended up what really happened is I started getting too comfortable in Seattle. I started knowing all the bartenders, all the restaurants, all the people, and then the street racing, and then the cops. And then my mom worked at what is now Macy's, but back then was the Bon Marché. And I used to throw some pretty big house parties too. And she heard some of the girls working. They're like, oh my God, that party last night was insane. That guy Bertim, he's so much fun and all this stuff. And my mom's like, okay, that's it. So she calls me up. She goes, hey, come over for dinner. And she goes, you're giving your boss a 2-week notice and you're getting the fuck out. I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, you're leaving. I don't care that. I was like, I don't live at home. She's like, no, you're leaving Seattle. You're going to go chase your dream and go figure it out. I think she could see me getting too comfortable and I wasn't going to pursue anything. So 2 weeks later, she jumps in our old Chevy Dually with the U-Haul truck in my toolbox, and we headed down here. And then my dad was working a job, so he flew down to San Diego, met us down there, and I got the job with Tim over there. I didn't have a place to live, so I was living on his couch, my boss at the time, having a good time. But if you can imagine at the time I was 23, a 23-year-old kid who's worked the racing circuit, who's come up from nothing, who accelerated in a short amount of time from sweeping floors to, going and running Petit Le Mans and working on these race teams and going over the wall. If you have a privateer shop guy try to tell me what I should be doing, how I should work on a car, I already knew everything. So I quickly got fired. And then I found myself
because you didn't know fuck all. The older you get, the more you know you don't, or more you don't know.
I didn't know shit, and I'm sitting here telling all these guys how it is, and I just had a big mouth on me. And so I found myself homeless, and this was right after I just bought, or I bought as a loose term. I think it was like a '96. It was a Mark III GTI VR6. It was like one of my favorite cars. I always wanted one. And I was starting to make enough money. My first payment dropped, and then my boss was like, get the fuck out of here. So I was living in that thing for a little while. I came up to, my sister had a soccer game. She lived in Brooklyn, played for Long Island U. She was like a developing ODP soccer player. And she had a game up here in Northridge, which is just north of LA, about 30 miles. So San Diego's 80 miles south of me. Northridge is 60 miles north, so I just jumped in the car. Halfway in between here, like 10 miles from here, Santa Ana is where Porsche Motorsport was. And I started meeting all these guys on the race circuit. So Henry, their technical director, I go, hey, can I just come in for a tour? He's like, yeah, sure. I come in, he's putting an engine on the dyno. I'm like, don't you have a guy for that? Because he's the data guy and running the shop. He goes, yeah, we lost our dyno guy. I'm like, I want a job. And he's like, oh, he's like, no, you don't have any qualifications. You have no education. You know nothing about electronics. I was like, yeah, but I can fabricate. He goes, we don't fabricate here. We just build engines and dyno them and go to the track and do traction control development and things like that. I was like, fuck. Okay, so I went up to Northridge, came back down, started kind of just looking for a place to live. So I was living in my car at Huntington Beach State Park down here. And it was cool because I'd wake up in the morning, I'd go swim, and then I'd take a shower in the public showers there before anybody was around. I thought I was living the dream. I'm like, just coming from Seattle, I'm living on the beach. I got a cool car, at least until they repo it.
The California dreaming.
It was great. And I didn't tell my parents because I didn't want them to worry. But I met a guy named Dustin who works for Porsche Motorsport. We met at Laguna Seca once, and we became friends. And we saw each other out drinking. He goes, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just, I lost my job in San Diego, and I'm just trying to figure my shit out up here. He's like, no, you're going to sleep on my couch. So I ended up staying on his couch for a couple months. But in the time, I stalked Porsche. I was like almost getting a restraining order at Porsche because I was there almost every day begging for a job. Beg. Please give me a job. And finally, they're like, well, we have nothing for you. I'm like, whatever you put me in, I'll be the best at it. So I actually started cleaning up the bathrooms. And then right after that, they put me into the dyno shit.
Cleanest fucking bathrooms ever, man. Cleanest bathrooms.
That's it. And then right after that, they
10 out of 10.
Right after that, they put me in the dyno room. So the way I got my job actually there, Alvin Springer, he's the guy who helped. If you've heard of Andile, so it's Alan Dieter and Arnold.
Yeah, we interviewed him. I don't remember. I think we interviewed him when I don't know. That's been a while now, but we did talk to him. He's a cool dude.
Oh, Alvin.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's awesome.
That dude's got some stories.
Oh yeah, he does. So he's like, what the fuck do you know about cars? And he was very brash. I'm like, well, I know this, and this. And he goes, what do you know about what we're doing here? Why should we hire you? And I said, because I'm going to have your job one day. And he looked at me, he goes, let's hope so. And he walks off. And then he told Uwe, who was his predecessor, said, hey, hire that kid.
Did you believe that when you said it?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Remember, I was a cocky maniac 23-year-old at the time. I truly believe I could run the world. I for some reason, I had this innate. I got a lot of I had a lot of self-doubt as a younger man in my 18, 19, and then when I went from sweeping a floor in a shop to jumping over the wall, changing tires within a 1-year period, that I developed a lot of, like, whether it's a false sense of confidence, but I did, which was detrimental, but also it helped me because it gave me that fake it till you make it attitude. And you have to say yes. You have to just, Oh yeah, you want me to jump over the wall? Fine, I'll be better than you're a guy who's been training for a year. And that was like kind of the attitude I had. It was abrasive.
Well, jumping over the wall and failing is a lot better than not jumping over the wall at all.
Exactly. Yeah, and it was just that weird attitude that I had that it helped and hurt me a lot. But anyways, where was I on that one?
Alvin Springer.
Springer. So I truly believed that I was going to run Porsche Motorsport one day. I was like, just put me in. I'll do a better job than anybody. Because you don't know you don't know how hard this is. You don't, like, as a young person, you don't know what it's like to get punched in the face and then get back up and try to like do it over again and then get hit again. So those are the lessons that I had to learn in a short amount of time. But they gave me an opportunity, so I wasn't going to squander that. I later went to the dyno and I said, hey, how do I get to Daytona? I want to go. It's February. I got my job in May. In February, I know we have Daytona. We're pushing. He goes in a couple of years after you learn the electronics. So I was like, I'm going to learn the electronics in the next 3 months. I barely knew how to like open my AOL at the time. I didn't know anything about computers. And so I sat down and I actually still have here, I'll be right back. 1 second.
All right.
Oh, I don't have it. One of the guys here at the shop found my notebook that I had from back then at Porsche. That all my hand scribbled is a binder about this thick of how to open every software system, what WinDarab was, what ZWIS was, what timing tables, knock tables, every single thing about the architecture of Bosch ECU. I had it. It was just right here in the showroom. I was just showing somebody, but I just obsessed over learning. I just wanted to learn. And so in February, they actually said, all right, fine, come out. You showing us that you understand how to tune an engine on the dyno. You know what to look for. You know how to give reports. And so I went to Daytona. I was like, holy shit, I'm here. You know, it's the 24 hours of Daytona in 04, it would have been. It was amazing. And but can you see how a young guy would go from sweeping floors to 4 years later, you're at Daytona working for Porsche with a white shirt on with your laptop? I had no business doing that. But
yeah, it sounds like you just wanted it.
You
just wanted it more than anything in the world.
That's it. And there was nothing in my way. I didn't give a shit about partying. I did. I had fun partying. Everything was secondary to that. And I was single. I had no family around, so I was able to just drill down and do this. And I dedicated every ounce of my life to being as good as I could at that. And so,
have you seen as an sidebar here, as a business owner now? Do you see any of that in anybody?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you see people with that?
100%. And I literally hire people based on the spark and how they talk to me in the interview. Like Bobby, he's like my MVP. I love this guy. He's 27 right now, and I hired him out of a gas station. And, you know, he got recommended by a friend who worked at a Porsche dealership up the way. And Bobby, I was telling Amy, who works here, I was like, shit, that kid reminds me of me when I was younger. A little cocky. He already knows everything. But he shows up. There he is, right there. He shows up, and he kills it. He really, really, really wanted to learn, and so that's how I hire. I hire people when they really want to be a part of something. I was like, look, you can have my job. It's for sale. If you want it, it's there. But you have to take the right steps to get there.
So how do you go from Porsche Motorsport to BBI?
Interesting. So I always want to do my own thing. And one thing happened at Porsche Motorsport. I think it was like in 06.
Why did you always want to do your own thing? What was the
idea. I have no idea. I had my dream job. I had no idea. I still don't know why. I sometimes wish I just had a nice corporate job that I had my PTO and I did all that shit. But I really, really don't know why. I don't know what even Joey Seeley, he has motion engineering. He was my business partner at BBI when we started. I'll get into that. But even like he was always telling me, like, what are you doing? Why are you chasing this? I was 22, 23 years old. Hey, one day I'm going to have my own race shop. I'm going to have my own race shop because I saw other people doing it. I'm like, shit, I can do it better. You know, that cockiness back then. It was just like a huge, it was very naive because you don't know the nuances of it. Nobody tells you like, okay, you're so good at working on cars. Go start your own shop.
Have fun making payroll.
Right. Go start your own shop. But guess what? Yeah. When you go to Home Depot and you're buying a mop bucket, you're coming over here and you're going to go pick up parts and you got to make a UPS label and you're calling and getting parts. He goes, all of that shit you're not good at. And that's where you're going to spend 90% of your time. Nobody told me that. But anyways, so there was a guy named Gary Topol here in Huntington Beach who knew Greg Fordall from Washington State. They were friends. And when Greg would come down here and race, Topol would come to all of our race teams. You know, he'd be like, I think he was in charge of fueling, you know, so he was always our fueling guy. So, but he had a shop a couple miles from here. And one day he told me when I was working for Porsche, he goes, well, if you ever want to start, I got the storage unit next door. So I went to my boss at Porsche. I said, look, I've been obsessing over this my whole life. I'm going to start my own shop. I got enough money to, you know, I got about a month worth of runway, 2 months worth of runway. But he's like, I can't have you quit because I was starting to develop. By this time, I've already been to Le Mans twice working for Porsche. In 05, I went there as the only U.S. representative. We brought 3 cars there, and we took first, second, and third GT, all American cars. We pushed so hard on TC strategy and NOx strategy, and we obsessed over. We didn't just take what Porsche gave us because Porsche Motorsport North America was a subsidiary of PAG, Porsche AG. And we were kind of like the redhead stepchild. Like we would build the engines there, we'd do all this stuff, we'd get all their software, and I'd have to work with their engineers, but I would always tweak. And there's another guy named Ethan who worked there who was the same way, just a savant when it came down to tweaking the ECUs to get another couple of miles an hour on the back straight at, let's say, you know, it's like we would do stupid things like knock the NOx sensitivity on cylinder 2 and 5 down just a little bit because they're noisy because the NOx sensor's right above it. So we're like, let's try it. Oh, cool. We picked up 2 miles an hour. Engine temps went down just a little bit. We did weird things like turning the TC off in the pit so you can actually get a good burnout leaving when you had tons of steering wheel angle. All the little things, I think people started to see what we were doing and say, hey, these guys actually really care, you know? But anyways, fast forward. Gary Topol leased me a small storage unit. So I had a padlock, a roll-up door, but that was it. There was nothing. There was no lighting, nothing. So I'd get my very, very, very first job at new BBI. I wasn't even BBI at the time, I think. It was just a storage unit. I lowered a Cadillac Escalade.
Storage unit incorporated.
Yeah, I lowered a Cadillac Escalade and put 24s on it for one of my good friends. And I remember driving that to my boss's house at Porsche. And I was like, check it out. This was my first job. He's like, what the fuck are you doing? It's like, you're just working on Daytona prototypes, developing traction control strategy, and you're lowering a Escalade. I'm like, I don't care. I made $3,000 cash. I'm happier than shit. I'm doing my own thing. I don't have to answer to you. But so Porsche asked me to come back. They said, hey, then just come back as a consultant, do the 36 weekends a year on the road, you know, with World Challenge, IMSA, and Grand Am. I was like, okay, so I'm going to work half as much. I'll make the same money. So I had enough money through that job to keep BBI afloat. Almost enough money because then I had rent at the shop. And that's when I left Porsche. That was the next time that I became living on a couch, you know. So that was another 2.5 month stint trying to figure out how to make ends meet. And then I started getting weird jobs in, and then I'd polish the floors, and then I'd paint the walls, and I got these metal halide lights off of Craigslist, and then, you know, it slowly built the shop up that way. And that's kind of how BBI started. It was just, we slowly, I mean, and when I say slowly, like BBI is almost 16 years old now. So it's been a wild ride and just constant pushing.
When did BBI become the BBI I know? Like when was what 2008? What happened?
I did a job I welded an exhaust system. I got pretty good at welding. I was a pretty good fabricator, and I was obsessed with building exhaust systems. So I'd do really nice TIG welded systems. I would always go, right when I was in that storage unit, I would always go to a place called Brabus. They had a showroom here right by the airport, and it was just beautiful. And
I love the old Brabus AMG stuff.
So
dude.
good. It's just like
so dope.
And so I would go and sit in their showroom. I'd dress up a little bit, you know, so I didn't look like a dirtbag because I was always wearing Dickies and covered in grease. And I'd just sit and watch and listen to how the guys talk to their clients. And I would just get a coffee and talk to the receptionist and then talk to their sales staff. And finally, this guy Andreas comes up to me and goes, "What the hell are you doing here? I see you here every Saturday." I'm like, "Oh, I'm just watching." Because one day I'm going to have a shop like this. One day I'm going to have something mega. Well, what are you doing now? I'm like, well, I build exhaust systems, and my one of this young guy next to me, he hacks and tunes ECUs. He's like, oh shit. Well, the new S65 came out, and we built an exhaust system for it and tuned it and charged a shit ton of money, like 3 times more than I thought. But that's Andrea said, I'm going to send you a customer. This is what you're going to charge for it. You're going to peel me off a little bit on the back end for a commission. and you keep the rest. I'm like, holy shit. So I worked on this brand new S65, SL, sorry, it was an SL65. Brabus didn't have an exhaust system for it yet, and they didn't have a tune. So we did it. The car hauled ass. We straight piped it, basically. Delivered it to him. A week later, the car shows up at my shop. And this little dude, really nice guy, gets out. He goes, I want to know who worked on my car. I'm like, oh, shit. Because I didn't like people coming to the shop because it looked horrible. It had still stuff stored from, like, my neighbors who was leasing it to me, his construction site, had, like, concrete bags in the back. And I'm like, oh, no. I don't think I even had a lift at the time. I think it was still, we did that on jack stands and with a chop saw. It was great. And then, so I'm like, yeah, I'm Bertim. What happened? He goes, well, whatever you did is perfect. And I love it. And he goes, what the hell are you doing here? I'm like, well, I kind of gave him my backstory. He goes, okay, cool. I'd like to have a meeting with you later. I was like, when? In a couple weeks or something like that. I'm like, cool. Right at that time, Joey Seeley came down from Seattle. I glazed over how him and I met, but he came down from Seattle because I asked him, I go, hey, I'm starting to get a little bit more busy. I'm going to give you half the company if you run the back and let me run the front. I'm going to get the clients. I'm going to do the book and all that stuff, but you got to bust your ass. I'm going to bring the work in. You got to make sure it goes out. And so he's like, cool. So we teamed up. At that time, this guy, Jeff, with that Mercedes, invites us over to his house, and he's just talking to us, listening, telling it, what are your aspirations? I'm like, well, I want to go big. I want to this and that. And I know where we're going to go.
What are you thinking this meeting is about at the time?
Maybe we're going to work.
You have to have an inkling that you have to know that he wants to put money in or something. It's got to be.
I thought he had a fleet of cars, and I thought he was interviewing us to work on them. And so he goes, I'm sorry, we got to cut this meeting short. I have an obligation to go to. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Thanks for having us over. We get out. He goes, no, you're coming with us. We're going to go look at buildings. I'm going to buy you guys a building. I'm going to own it. I'm going to rent it back to you, and I'm going to set you guys up. I'm going to teach you how to run a business. I was like, holy shit. You got to be joking me. So I ended up having to sell all of my interest in BBI to him, and I was going to earn it back across 5 years. And he owned the building, and so we were paying rent to him, and so he was wildly successful. He came from nothing also, but he had escrow companies. Like, I think he had 48 escrow companies, and then he started narrowing it down to one. So he had a financial team behind him. So he's like, I'm going to teach you how to do finances. I'm going to teach you how to run a business. I'm going to teach you your checks and balances, and I'm going to teach you all that stuff. But what I can't teach you is what you already know. You just need to grow there. And so it was amazing. I mean, we fought a lot because I was stubborn and Joey was stubborn, but we got there. And then at about year 3, we started talking. We were actually in the black. We started making some money and covering our nut and paying back the equipment loan that he gave us. And he said, I've sold like 5 more of my locations. I only have 1 left. I know you're going to buy me out at 5 years, but this is what his plan was. He depreciated all of his investments across 5 years, so he took all the write-offs. The value, the on-book value of all the equipment was 0 because the depreciation schedule was up. And I thought in my head, I'm like, man, this guy is going to like give us all of our stuff back. Just give. And I think that was his plan. Yeah. Because he told me, he was like, would you mind if I stuck around for more than 5 years and we can really I can invest in other buildings. We can really just like make this work because you guys have what it takes. I'm like, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, he passed away just shortly after that. And then my business is in my name. It's not in Joey's name. The family's like, what are we going to do? We just lost our father, our provider, everything like that. And so it got ugly. We kept paying rent. And I remember just like, holy shit, we're done. We had a good run though. Time to rebuild. Long story short, we were able to negotiate with the family and find a buyer for the building for one of our other customers, bought the building from the family, paid them good market value for it. And then we leased that from them for 2 more years. And then we paid the family off for the business and bought the rights to the name back. So that was a wild ride, but that was how BBI went from shack to a really beautiful shop with an engine building room and all that stuff. A guy believed in us, and luckily we made right by him and showed him that we could do it, and his investment wasn't squandered, which was really cool. But he was one of the most amazing mentors ever, but passed away at 56 from a heart attack. So that was a challenge. 3 years after that, Joey and I were fighting a lot, so we were like, all right, we gotta separate. We gotta go separate paths. I respect you, you respect me. Cool. There's enough customers in Southern California for everybody. Let's split ways. So we did that, and then That was back in 2015. So he's running Emotion Engineering. I'm running BBI. And then we start competing with each other, and which was cool because like it forces us to level.
It's always good to have that motivation.
Yeah, and it always has that just that little knife in the back. You're like, all right, I'm not going to sleep.
Yeah, the spite, dude. Spite.
I'm not sleep.
Spite is an excellent motivator.
Yeah, and you never want to be motivated out of spite, but I'll tell you what, it's like some good jet fuel for the fire.
It works.
It does. Yeah. So we still see each other every once in a while. We're cool now. We had a lot of like childish beef with each other, but it's all bullshit. But we're fine. But yeah, that's in short. And here we are, 15 years later.
So what do you guys do now? What is BBI?
Well, BBI right now, our business is siloed in four areas. We have an engine department, so we build engines, air cooled and water cooled. 40% of our 50% of our engines now come from other shops or other race teams for us to build. A lot of times show up in boxes without cars. That's one. The other side is our parts side. So we sell roll bars, exhaust systems, suspension components, safety, all of the fun stuff for cars to other shops like BBI. So we have a lot of vendors and dealers that carry our components. So, and we also have a direct to consumer side. So our website, you can buy all of our stuff on there. The other part is projects and racing. So projects are like long-term projects that live on the lift that need a lot of reverse engineering, 3D scanning, machining, all of that. And then the racing side is when we go to Pikes Peak, we build cars, whether we're modifying cup cars or we're building stuff from the ground up. And then the fourth one is install and service. So dealer alternative service and then basic installs of, exhaust systems, all the stuff we sell on our parts side. So that's BBI in short. We primarily focus on Porsche. I mean, we dabble in other cars every once in a while when a client says, hey, I've got a McLaren. I know you've worked on my Porsche. I would rather you do it. So we'll do that every once in a while, but it always bites us in the ass. I'd rather just stay focused on working on air and water cooled Porsches.
Yeah, sometimes that stuff is about keeping relationships, and that's important.
Yeah, no, it really is. And then we have one side of the business that's starting to grow is our consulting side, our consulting and engineering side that Dimitri and I head up. We're starting to consult for a few OEs out there. It's almost like we're our agility, because we're small and scrappy, we're able to get a lot done in a short amount of time, where as a corporation, they want to do something, but there's a lot of red tape. It's a big moving ship. It's hard to kind of get everybody to march in that same direction. So they'll come to us to execute a project quickly or some reverse engineering. And Dimitri and I also own a scanning company called ScanHub 3D. So we do a lot of reverse engineering that way, and we apply all that to BBI and then to our clients as well. So I'm having a lot of fun in that silo, the consulting engineering side.
So I have like a couple more things I want to talk about. You got time?
Of course.
We're at about an hour. You got time to
yeah.
chat? Okay. So I really want to talk about some of the aspirations that you probably have. But first I want to talk a little bit about Huna Pegasus and how that came to be and why that car exists and how did that, because it's a wild car.
It's wild.
You spend enough time looking at it. When I was at SEMA, you walk up and it was there in the Mobile One booth, and you walk up to the car, you look at it, you're like, okay, there it is. I hadn't seen it before. And you kind of look at it a little bit and you walk away and you come back and you go, oh. And every time you come back, you're going, oh, because there's some new shit to look at that's super interesting, especially if you get down on your knees and you get close to that thing. There's a lot of special parts done to that car. I mean, that car is wildly custom, and I don't think anybody even understands. Maybe they do, but if they don't, it is insane. What was the concept of this car, and why does it exist?
Great question. 10 years ago, I met a guy named Joe Scarbo, brilliant engineer, Scarbo Performance. He started doing some back-end engineering for us, and he was always kind of, to me, it felt like he was a little ahead of his time on all of this stuff. So we developed a relationship, became friends, and he's like, hey, Bertim, I got to show you this project that I've always wanted to do. I'm like, okay, cool. What is it? And so it was kind of like a Singer, but not pretty. It was a 73 RSR clone off of like a 66 912 with a Subaru engine in it, but it was all-wheel drive. It was a rear engine, 4-cylinder STI engine, all-wheel drive through a shitty gearbox, and then he had unequal length front suspension, like nice wishbone front suspension, rear suspension, billet knuckles. But in the footprint of a standard car that had like 8s in the front and 9.5s in the rear, right? And the car looked, he ran 18s on the concept of it, and the car looked like a little stink buggish. But when he showed me that 10 years ago, it kind of burned something in my head. And as we're developing cars for Pikes Peak and autocross, and we're competing, in some endurance series, I always thought about that car. I'm like, man, a lightweight, all-wheel drive, early car, right? Whether it's air-cooled or water-cooled, seems pretty freaking cool. So we go to Pikes Peak with Jeff Zwart. We meet him. We build him a car 2013. We got third place then. It was a twin-turbo GT3 Cup car. 2014, we got second place. 2015, we finally got him the championship in 15, and Time Attack won. At 2015, that's when Joey and I split ways. And then I moved into this building. So I took a hiatus from Pikes Peak. I just had to focus on the business and like licking our wounds and getting back to it. We built a car in 2019 called Lucy. It was it's a 2014 Grand Am GTD Cup car, right? And then we twin turboed it, put some downforce to it, and really, really sticky Michelins, and ended up getting crushing the Time Attack 1 record by, I think, like 13 or 14 seconds up there.
Jeez.
So, but I was always, when I'm modifying these cars, I was thinking, man, if we could move the pickup points to where we wanted, if we could really have a lightweight all-wheel drive system, if we could do all of this stuff, holy shit. But I didn't like how high the car sat. So the only way to get the car to sit down, you got to section the chassis, and then you have to push the wheels out, because the arc that the hood seals on, the fenders, the headlights come down, and that arc right there, that would hit the tires if you lowered the car too much. So we had to put the inside of the tire outside of that real estate. So Joe and I just started going back and forth on this, and I said, I'll fucking kill you if you put a Subaru engine in this thing. So let's build it. So he's like, all right, cool. He started building his own car, and then we started building a 996 turbo engine for him, and he got the gearbox and a 991 front differential, starts putting this thing together. And in 2000, I'm going to jump around. I'm a horrible storyteller, but in 2000...
This is good. I'm following just fine.
2021, we get an opportunity. I'm going to put the Joe side of the thing. We get an opportunity to run 3 cars, one in Time Attack 1, one in open car. So in Time Attack 1 is a GT2 RS Club Sport that we modified to go run, and David Donahue drove that. The other one was Lucy that we retooled, so the cars aerodynamically looked identical, right? And visually they looked identical. And that was an open class car, so it was about 400 pounds lighter, about 200 more horsepower. And then we ran in the Yokohama Trophy GT4 series, we ran Tanner Faust in a Cayman. So long story short, we ended up doing first place with Tanner, first place with Raphael in the open car, and third place with David in the GT2 Club Sport. So it was the first time I think a privateer ever brought home 3 trophies in 3 different classes in the history of Pike. So that was cool. So Brian Scotto sits with me after that. We're interviewing. He's from Hoonigan. He goes, "But Tim, what's next? What's next?" I said, "Well, I'll tell you what's next. I want to build what that car is. It's really called is an SV RSR, Scarborough Vintage RSR. I want to build this with Joe, and I want to do it for the mountain. So whatever Joe thinks we're going to do, it's just going to be 10 times more than that." So he's like, "Well, how much is that going to cost?" I said, "A lot of money." He goes, "No," and he straight up told me nobody's going to pay for that. So Ken Block gets signed by VAG, and all of a sudden, this was like 4 months later. All of a sudden, I called Brian up.
VAG, Volkswagen
Audi Group. So he gets signed as an Audi driver. Well, they own Porsche, they're a majority stakeholder in Porsche. So I said, "What if we get Ken to drive? Can you get it funded?" He goes, "Holy shit," hangs up on me, calls me back. Ken's interested. Yeah, and we don't have much time, right? So the clock's ticking. So we go to SEMA. I sit down with him. He brings me into a meeting with Mobile One. Mobile One says they're interested. I'm interested. I'm literally drawing a napkin and texting Scarborough, "Send me some rendering. Send me anything. Send me a 3D model of what the cage looks like. Anything." And at that time, it was still a rear engine car, and we just haven't had it laid out yet. So
This sounds strangely like, yeah, I can absolutely tune your car on the dyno.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? This sounds exactly like, yeah, man, I can absolutely change those tires at the track. I can do it.
Yeah, it's a lot like that. It's a lot of jumping off the cliff and building the wings on the way down. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but the ground's coming fast and we got to get it done. So you just do it.
Yeah.
And that's been a lot. Yeah, you're good observation. So as we're designing this car, Ken Block signs off on it. Hoonigan signs off on it. We get started. We get our first check in late December. late December, no, early January, and we have to build a car and be at the mountain in 6 months from nothing. So that was hard. But during that time, as soon as we found out Ken was driving, I was like, well, fuck, like 911s are already diabolical to drive at the limit unless you know a 911. Well, he doesn't. Let's move the engine in the middle. And that's when we started designing a mid-engine version. And then the biggest challenge was, how do we make a mid-engine horizontally opposed platform, or horizontally opposed engine all-wheel drive? So the transmission's behind the engine, the front diff's here, engine here, transmission here. You have to have a transfer case here, and the only logical place is to run the drive shaft over the top of the engine, and that becomes now your armrest, because it's spooky. I'll send you a video. I was just on the dyno with the car like last week, and I'm in top of fifth gear on 4 rollers holding this thing like wide open throttle, and you can actually feel the drive shaft. It's not vibrating, but it makes this eerie noise that I've never heard in another car. This thing just spinning at like 7,300 RPMs right next to you. It's a lot of mass, a lot of energy. Spooky. But anyway, so that's kind of how that car came about. It was Joe Scarbo's brainchild, and then I just mixed a bunch of crazy maniac shit into it, and got rid of the H-pattern gearbox, put a sequential in it, got rid of the Medsker, put the late model M91 or 9A1 in there, and then put some big ass turbos on it, and we blew the engine up a few times.
How is it to drive?
The car's actually really nice to drive. We never,
for who? For you, or for me, or for like my grandma? Like when you say that, what does that mean?
It's very intimidating when you get in it, but when you start leaning on it, the car talks back to you. You can feel it doing its things. You can feel the differentials opening and closing. I haven't had enough time in it, but Monday and Tuesday I'm going up to the track, and we're going to do a 2-day test with it. So I'll have a lot of seat time in it by then. But yeah, so.
What would someone like me, like a regular guy, like most of the dudes that listen to this podcast, just regular dudes, they got a 911 or on E30 M3 or something. If I got out of my 911 and got into this car, what would that experience be like for me?
You'd shit your pants.
Could I drive it?
Yeah, you probably could, but you'd be overwhelmed immediately by the mechanical grip. And once you start getting the aero and you're starting to pull 2 and 3 Gs, it's it's one of those things that your mind, it's like I had to actually make my foot stay down on the throttle. Like I found myself backing off because and the other thing that's funny is like a car that makes that much, like I drive like GT3s and all that on the track, and right at about, and what you see on data, right at about 1.2 Gs on a non-aero car, you'll watch my steering input, and I start to unwind it, because I know that that's going to be the kind of that. And in this thing at 1.2 Gs, I started to do that, but I had to keep turning the wheel in and keep my eye on the apex, because the thing just kept going. So I'm not used to it yet. I'm probably not the right person to be driving that car, but for testing, it's fine. But yeah, so
where's it going next? What are the plans with that thing? What's the
unfortunate? We all know Ken's unfortunate untimely passing. That really shook us, and I thought, I don't even want to talk about this car. I just want to put it back together and put it in a museum and pay my respect to the family and everybody. But then a couple weeks ago, Hoonigan called and said, hey, it looks like we want to go back to Pikes. It looks like we want to pay homage to him and his efforts and everything like that. And what better way to do it than sending it up the hill, whether it's at pace or even just a cool run up the hill. So they're still in the planning phases of that. But my job now, that's why I jumped on it. I was like, all right, well, I'm going to the dyno. I'm going to beat this thing up. And I got to go do a 2-day track test, get this thing ready for whoever's going to drive it up that hill. I want it ready and dialed. I don't want to be in the same position we were last year, scrambling. So that's where we're at right now. It's still emotional. It's still still weird.
Yeah, it's heavy.
And
it makes the prep even more heavy than if Ken was driving it.
Yeah, it does.
It becomes serious.
Yeah. No, this car has nearly killed me so many times in more ways than one, and it's pretty near and dear to a lot of people, and it's pretty special to obviously everybody who's been close to Ken. And then on our end, it's the craziest thing we've ever built, is this amazing opportunity that was put together because Ken said, sure, I'm interested. That's literally what it took. So it's day by day on this one. I just want to prep. I want to give and deliver the best possible car we can, in some respect.
Well, we'll see where it goes. I'm sure you guys will do well, and I'm looking forward to what you guys do with it and everything else that you're doing. And man, I really appreciate you coming to hang out with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's been awesome. It's been some great stories, and I hope to see Brownie out on the rally, man.
Well, I gotta apply, don't I?
You do. Right. We'll see if you make the cut.
Let me know when those applications start dropping. I'm gonna fill out like 15 of them.
All right. Just take like a bunch of pictures of the car from different angles.
It. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have like on the application process, there's like a little essay portion. Why do you want to come on the rally?
Right on.
And it is people don't know, but it's make or break. You know, there's people with like a cool car that put, man, I think it'd be fun to come on the rally. And I'm like, okay. And then there's dudes that are like, yeah, I'm bringing my dad. You know, we haven't done anything like this in a long time. We'd love to just experience your rally together. And I'm like, boom, you're in. Even if the car isn't as cool, you're in, dude. You know,
that's awesome.
It's the special part.
Yeah, when you and I met and when we connected at SEMA and you were telling me about it, I was like, that sounds special. That sounds like something that I want to get behind. Because honestly, I don't really like going on rallies. I don't like driving with a lot of people. I like being on the track or commuting. You know, knocking an on ramp off every once in a while, but. How you described it and what I've looked up, that seems special. That seems really, really cool. And yeah.
We hope so.
Well, we'll find out, won't we?
Well, we'll see you there, man. I appreciate you hanging out with me today. And actually, I'm flying out in 3 weeks to pick up my car.
Oh, cool.
So I'll come by and see you. Say hello.
We'll grab some tacos and a beer.
All right, man.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again.
See ya.